Yes.
It was BEPS all the way on day 4 at the IFA Congress here in Copenhagen. With me is Mukesh, Butani, Chairman BMR Legal and Permanent Scientific Member of IFA, and of course Jeffrey Owens, former Director of Tax Policy at OECD for almost 20 years. I'll first go to Mukesh. Mukesh, if you could quickly summarize, we had Mr. Owens from OECD right now talking up BEPS, defending the action points. You had some concerns from the industry as well as tax professionals. If you could quickly summarize the BEPS session today for us.
I wish it was possible for anyone to quickly summarize what BEPS is all about, but I think it should suffice to mention that before attending the session, I thought that there's a lot of reconciliation that needs to be done between what the objectives of politicians are, what non-partisan bodies like OECD can do, and what really impact would be on businesses. But after these sessions, I realized it's really an insurmountable task. Couple of key messages that I liked. Pascal was very clear that clearly within the G20 there are a group of countries which are non-OECD members, and their concern is economic non-taxation, and they will also make all attempts to avoid economic double taxation. So I think there would be stress points, particularly with respect to countries that don't follow the territorial system. But I think overall it seems to me that the message from the OECD was that they were very clear that they want to go ahead and fulfill the desires and expectations of the politicians.
Before I go to Jeffrey, Mukesh, quickly summarizing session 2 as well, which was how the tax system will look after 25 years.
Well, I think Jeffrey summarized it very well by saying he's going to be 90 by the time 25 years get past, so he's not going to be around to see it. I think it's a moving target. I think clearly we will be revisiting a lot of concepts such as the arm's length principle. I didn't know that the arm's length principle dates back to 1917 and it still keeps on getting modified. So over a period of time we will have kind of the old wine in the new bottle.
Yeah, Jeffrey, pleasure to have you here. I think the first question everyone wants to know, including in India, as a former director of tax policy at OECD, how is BEPS going to affect the tax professionals, the taxpayer, and the regulators?
I think it's probably going to have a major effect, not just on the tax professionals, but on government, in fact, anybody that's involved with taxation, including normal taxpayers. It's the most ambitious project that the OECD has ever taken on, and it's a project that covers almost all of the aspects, international, domestic, treaties, transfer pricing, anti-abuse provisions, information sharing, and tax competition. What I think is the key thing that came out of the session this morning was that even though it is a very ambitious agenda, it has to be completed in a relatively short period of time. And that just reflects the political realities. What's interesting from the Indian perspective is that the BEPS agenda actually corresponds quite closely to the current tax agenda of the Indian government on countering offshore non-compliance, on dealing with multinationals, on strengthening anti-abuse provisions, on looking at how you deal with the service sector, yes? And I think that explains why India has been one of the biggest supporters of the BEPS work. The last point I would make is the institutional framework. It really is an innovation for the OECD to invite the G20 non-OECD countries to come together as equal partners and develop new standards. And why do I say that's an innovation? Because when we did the Global Forum on Tax Transparency, the standards were set, and that forum was just about implementing them. This time we are saying, come to the table, help us set the standards, and help us implement them.
Jeffrey, I think this is a question quite a lot of people would want me to ask you. If you were still the OECD Director of Tax Policy, would you have taken the same approach, or would your approach to BEPS have been any different?
I believe that when you leave an organization, you leave it, I think Pascal is doing an excellent job. I have no advice to give him. I just wish him luck.
But is it achievable, Jeffrey? Tough, but achievable?
There is so much political capital behind the project that it cannot be seen to fail. Question is whether you get substantive change that you get a consensus on, or whether you fudge the outcomes. The 2-year deadline is very ambitious, and I'm pretty sure that of the 15 action plans, there will be some where it'll be at the end of 2 years. Here, in fact, are further proposals that we need to consider, and I think that's going to certainly be the case in the area of the digital economy.
In fact, my follow-up question was, would it have made sense for the OECD to prioritize this 15-point agenda For example, OECD made a lot of progress on exchange of information. Now, for example, the 2-3 other important items on the agenda would be the general anti-avoidance rule and
Transfer pricing.
transfer pricing. I think this would feature on the top of agenda for every country, whether you're an OECD or a
No.
non-OECD member.
But to a certain extent, there has been a prioritization in terms of the deadlines that are set, because some of the projects, some may actually result in some changes next week. Yeah, some will take it 6 months, some will take 12 months, some will take 2 years. So there's an implicit prioritization that's been built into the. But the other important thing to recognize is that by presenting this as a package, there will be always some elements which governments like and some elements which governments don't like. Yeah, so it enables you to build up a consensus, because you can trade. You win here, you lose there, but on balance, it's in your interest to reach a consensus.
So does this mean that one of the projects of OECD to come out with a comprehensive set of guidelines, which would serve as guideline for countries to legislate GAR, would still be on the agenda?
I think the GARS is an interesting one, because my own view is that I think it would be helpful, in fact, for the G20 to endorse the broad principle of a GARS, or at least something equivalent, yeah? And to provide some guidance on what is a good GARS and what is a bad GARS, because I get very annoyed when people ask the question, is a GARS a good thing or not? It depends on how it's designed. The UK GARS, I think, is quite an acceptable one. The original proposals in India, I think, were quite aggressive.
Jeffrey, last question and a quick answer. How will the tax system look in 25 years? Will it also be radically different from what it is now?
It'll be different. It'll be different. There will be some new taxes. I think the way that old taxes operate will change. There'll be a shift in the balance of tax, whether between direct and indirect. But also there'll be an increased tendency for governments to put in taxes, but not to call them taxes, to call them levies, to call them fees. And the other change, I think, that is probably even more significant is in the way the tax administrations are going to function. Yeah? They're going to be both spending and collecting agencies. They're going to have a different type of relationship with the taxpayer and with tax advisors. They're not going to be just collectors of data, they're going to be users of data, and there's going to be much more of a partnership between business and government in actually administering the system, recognizing that it can be a win-win situation. It doesn't have to be that when the taxpayer wins, then the tax authorities lose. You can get a situation where all parties, in fact, gain.
Jeffrey, pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you at the Mumbai Congress next year as well.